Once when I was in college, I led a group of freshmen on an outdoor orientation trip. We were assigned to do trail maintenance in the wilds of far northern New Hampshire. It was a beautiful place and a wonderful trip. But it turns out that trail maintenance actually involves a whole lot of killing small trees. The goal, of course, is to clear the trail so that people can walk on it, and you can't walk on a trail if there are trees growing on it. And I had a lot of talks with myself about how killing a few small trees to maintain the trail maintained the possibility for people to experience the pristine environment and therefore have a desire to protect all the trees. And yet every time I killed one of them, it hurt. It is therefore probably not surprising to learn that I'm not very good at pruning. I'm always so afraid of doing too much that I don't actually do enough. I would like to tell you that this is because I believe that we should not do harm to living things unless absolutely necessary, but as I'm told that pruning is actually very good for things that need to be pruned, I don't think I get to fall back on that. According to gospel commentaries, grapevines are things that need pruning. This comes particularly from the book, The Five Gospels. Vines do not have branches, contrary to popular usage, but canes. Each year, the canes are snipped from the vines and piled in the vineyard to be burned. The vines will not bear good fruit or fruit in abundance if they are not pruned annually. The metaphor-loving writer of the Gospel of John suggests that this is the way of the true followers of the way of Jesus as well. We too need regular pruning so that we can bear fruit. I suspect that many people feel about pruning themselves as I do about pruning anything. It's uncomfortable, it is done with caution, and we don't want to go too far. And therefore, we often do not prune quite far enough. It may feel like this pandemic is an unfortunate time to come to this passage of the gospel because the impact of the pandemic has been an abiding desire to return to normal and profound objections to the ways that our lives have been pruned from the outside beyond our control. But here is this gospel lesson anyway. And when we're honest, we note that even this awful pruning has provided some rather strange fruit. Now, in John's gospel, God is the gardener and God is the one doing the pruning. We are fairly passive in this setup. We are definitely not in charge of self-pruning. Phew. Likewise, we are not in charge of fruit production. Fruit comes from being connected to Jesus and well pruned by God, and we're sort of passive fruit bearers. Fruit, or lack thereof, isn't really our fault. We are tended, rooted, and pruned to be the best fruit bearers we can be, and we can simply be, and God's goodness will work through us. Nice. And while I think this idea is incomplete, I think it may be worthy of consideration. This idea may be something that creates balance within us. Many of us try really hard all the time. And this suggests that we can stop and let God's goodness just keep flowing. And so while again, I want to say it's incomplete, I also think it's an important truth. If God is the gardener and the pruner, then who are we when we resist the pruning? I suspect that we are like those vine canes that are holding for dear life to the canes that have already been snipped and berating ourselves that we can't manage to bring them back to life. There are these dead, decaying branches, and we're holding them in place, willing them to grow again, and in doing so, missing the new life that is sprouting within us. Several years ago, I watched a TED Talk by Dan Gilbert, a psychology professor at Harvard University, entitled The Psychology of Your Future Self. And Gilbert's ideas have stayed with me ever since. He opens his talk saying, "At every stage of our lives, we make decisions that will profoundly influence the lives of the people we're going to become. And then when we become these people, we're not always thrilled with the decisions we've made. So young people pay good money to get tattoos removed that teenagers paid good money to get. Middle-aged people rush to divorce people who young adults rushed to marry. Older adults work hard to lose what middle-aged adults worked hard to gain." And on and on and on. The question is, as a psychologist, that fascinates me: why do we make decisions that our future selves so often regret? I'm hoping that you're already seeing how this relates to letting go of God's pruning without fighting it. He states his thesis directly. I really appreciate it when people do that. And it says, "What I want to convince you today is that all of us are walking around with an illusion that our history, our personal history, has just come to an end. That we have just recently become the people we were always meant to be and will be for the rest of our lives." And as you might hope, Gilbert goes on to prove this along the way, and then he concludes. "Many of us can remember who we were 10 years ago, but we find it hard to imagine who we're going to be. And then we mistakenly think that because it's hard to imagine, it's not likely to happen. When people say, 'I can't imagine that,' they're usually talking about their own lack of imagination and not about the unlikelihood of the event that they're describing. The bottom line is, time is a powerful force. It transforms our preferences. It reshapes our values. It alters our personalities. We seem to appreciate this fact, but only in retrospect. Only when we look backward do we realize how much change happens in a decade. It's as if, for most of us, the present is a magical time. It's a watershed on the timeline. It's the moment at which we finally become ourselves. Human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. The person you are right now is as transient, as fleeting, and as temporary as all the people you've ever been. The one constant in our life is change." To say it rather differently, pruning happens whether we want it to or not. And we can make peace with it and let it be, or we can fight with it. But it won't change the fact that things change. Now, while I prefer when I can read it with some verses missing, 1 John 4 is a very important chapter in the Bible for most people I know, because it says the thing they believe most. God is love. And it says it strongly too. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God lives in us, and God's love is perfected in us. Those who say, "I love God," and hate their siblings are liars. For those who do not love a sibling whom they can see cannot love a God whom they have not seen. Perhaps this fits the idea that loving God and loving other people are two sides of the same coin, inseparable, although they appear different. These claims about God, that God is love and that loving people is a way of loving God, are the lens through which I see the entirety of the Bible. And I remain grateful that it is there and there to be used. If you continue reading John chapter 15, it goes on to sound a whole lot like 1 John 4. The vine and branches metaphor morphs very quickly to point out that the fruit God is looking for is the practice of abiding in love. So both of these passages point to the question, what impairs love? And what encourages it? If we are being continually pruned by God, what helps us let go of what we're done with? And what helps us connect with what God is up to next? Or in the metaphor, how do we let go of what's been pruned and is now dead so there is space for new growth? Perhaps the best thing that we can do to start is to notice. We can notice what has been pruned so that we can let it go. And we can notice what is growing so we can watch it growing. It seems perhaps this is a very good passage for today. We are not the gardener. We are not in charge, but we can, at the very least, stop impeding the gardener's work and instead start noticing what it is. May it be so. Amen.